Bob Dylan, Taylor Swift, Sam Cooke, Klaus, Meine, and now Kristin Lisanti. What unites these four songwriters and this one executive coach, speaker, and trainer? Change. From the personal to the political to the cultural and corporate, change is a constant theme in our lives. And we don't always like it, he says as he prays to the gods of gravity to delay the inevitable melding of face and torso for a few years longer. But we love these songs about change for a reason. They are partners in our quest to make sense of the impermanent. And so is Kristin. We are in the midst of a high-Richter shift in the world of work. AI, global disruption, 24-second news cycles, all putting us in a constant state of cortisol intoxication. There are no simple fixes. The way forward, according to Kristin, is to embrace complexity, an awkward, sweaty group hug with the unknown, and to realize that in the midst of all that chaos, leaders actually have more power than we think. We have the power to shift from a to-me mindset to a through-me mindset when it comes to change. When change happens to me, I am a victim. But when I allow it to move through me, it's easy to see where I can step into my power and make a difference. And I can invite others to share in that power, multiplying our impact. We have the power to build healthy, high-performing cultures in our workplaces by creating a balance between psychological safety and meaningful challenge. It's not an either-or, but a dance between the two. And we have the power to model the change we want to see. The curse of leadership is that nothing changes until we do. That's also the gift of leadership, and we can embrace that gift with small steps, at least until we're ready to take a bigger one. This power can move us beyond the suffocating realm of the transactional and into the wide open possibility of the transformational. I like the sound of that. Maybe I'll write a song about it. Okay, Kristen Lisanti, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Thank you, TJ. So happy to be here.
I am excited to have you. I think we're going to explore some fun topics. I think the word change and transformation may come up a few times, and I think people are feeling a lot of change in the world. So maybe being more in the driver's seat of that change might help people feel a little more comfortable. So hopefully we get to explore that among other things. Before we dive too deep, though, I'd love to just give people a chance to kind of get to know you. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do for work and maybe a bit about how you came to be doing it?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Kristin Lisanti. I own and operate a business called Radiant Change, where we work with organizations, leaders, and communities who are navigating some form of change, ideally trying to lead some form of change and bring change forward, and introduce other ways of relating to and working with change. So getting out of some old linear surface level thinking around how change works and into a much more systems focused, creative, people first relationship to change. So I work a lot with leaders, do a lot of executive coaching, working with a lot of executive teams and aligning them around what is your purposeful vision, what's the kind of culture you're creating to allow your teams to achieve that vision. And talking to lovely people like you about my favorite topics, change, culture, and leadership.
Well, that sounds awesome. And thank you. I am excited to dive into all of that. Before we get too deep again, I want to just explore a little of maybe your own thoughts about the world of work, since this is the DesuckifyWork podcast, and just kind of get your read on some things. So what role does work play in your life personally?
Work plays a huge role in my life. Always has.
Yeah.
Always has. It's, I've always, for better or worse, and sometimes really it was for worse, I've always strongly identified myself and my value through my work. And I think a lot of us do.
Yeah.
Particularly by the time we get to leadership roles or we get to some level of seniority in an organization or in our careers. But I think that is a good thing, at least for me, as long as I'm able to hold it in balance with a broader understanding of myself in the world, right?
Yeah.
When I can get really myopic about, what I'm trying to achieve and kind of let ambition take over, then it really derails me, I find. And early on in my career, I had a big shift away from being solely ambition focused, which I was pretty type A in those early days, into being much more of an intention led leader. How do I want to show up? What kind of spaces do I want to create for people? And the irony is that my career actually took off when I stopped worrying so much about getting somewhere or getting stuff done. And I started worrying more about the how. And everything changed for the better, including I think a healthier relationship to work.
I have to imagine that is, if not universal, a near universal truth, that the less we invest everything into some single thing and more put it in context in our lives, and then think about the how of it. How am I approaching this? How am I doing this work in a way that actually might lead to some of the things I've been telling myself I want and what I want for my team? That does change everything, and easier said than done. I think, when we attach our identities to work, it can get pretty sticky. And I think there's probably a sweet spot for most of us where it's attached enough that it allows us to go all in on the things we want to go all in, but doesn't bleed into the rest of ourselves and take over the rest of ourselves. Did that ever show up for you in those early years where you were really all about work? Did it create any knock-on kind of effects in your non-work life where you were missing things or losing things or not experiencing what you really wanted?
Absolutely. I look back at that time and just to be totally honest, still practicing with this tendency, right? This is not you say sweet spot, but I think of it as definitely a practice of something. We're always navigating these tensions, right? Work, life, personal, professional, ambition, intention. But yeah, I think when I was overly indexing on work performance and professional value as personal value, what it meant for my personal life is that I was treating people in a very transactional way. It was like, okay, well, who are the people that I need to be in relationship with in order to achieve X? Or, what do I want to get out of this conversation with this friend in order to further, my own agenda? And I didn't know I was doing it. I wasn't doing it on purpose.
Right.
But I was doing it.
Yeah.
And I was missing things. I was missing friends' weddings. I was, staying at late at the office. I remember specifically one night I had a friend who lived 2 blocks from my office. And she had a whole bunch of people over for dinner, and I was supposed to cook. It was my recipe, my goat cheese enchilada recipe. And I was at the office until 9. And I was they were calling me frantically, and I was trying to text them through the instructions of what to cook for no good reason, TJ, for no good reason other than somebody said it was due the next day. And I didn't have enough of a backbone or enough perspective to be able to say, you know what, that can wait for tomorrow. I'm going to go do this, and the product will be better for it. Right?
Well, yeah, that's the truth ultimately, right? Is all of the stuff we do sort of chasing sort of an almost perfectionist view of what work should look like to the expense of everything else. It doesn't usually lead to better work product.
No.
So that's the
tragedy of
irony.
It, right?
Yeah.
We're like, okay, we need to think about work to the expense of everything else, and the work suffers.
Yeah. And I would love to get that goat cheese enchilada recipe at some point, by the way, because that sounds really interesting.
I'll send it to you right after we hang up.
Awesome. We can maybe share it with others if you're open to it. So that's kind of the personal view of work for you. I'm curious, you work obviously with a lot of leaders and you get to see a lot of the workspace. What is your take on sort of the state of work right now? I often ask, where does it fall on the suck meter? Is it off the charts? Is it actually trending somewhere better? Where do you feel like it's landing right now?
I have a twofold answer. You'll probably find that I answer most questions coming at it from both sides.
Sure.
I think that it feels really hard right now for people.
Yeah.
I think work is a real struggle for folks. I think that we are, I think that work is really hard right now.
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely getting better. And I think it's hard because we're in such a massive shift how we relate to work.
Yeah.
And COVID, the pandemic, was just obviously a catastrophe. And I think it reframed our relationships to work in some really kind of fundamental and important ways. Those ways have leapt us forward in terms of a trajectory that we were on to have more of an integration between our work and our lives. And as happens when change happens really swiftly, the systems don't change that fast. Our structures don't change that fast. Our policies don't change that fast. Even our mindsets, are slow to catch up to, emerging shifts that happen that abruptly. And so we are living in a moment, and this is where I get excited. So my response to your question is, I think it's an exciting moment, but that's just by the nature of the work I do.
Sure.
I think we're in a moment where we have a new relationship to work. We just don't know how to make it work yet. And that inherently, I think, is causing you're seeing a lot of like generational friction, and people are blaming the young people, but that's not, that's all, those are all false narratives, right? It's like all of us are going through this together. All of us want to have a healthier, more sustainable relationship to work.
Right.
We just have to be willing to do the work of figuring out how to make this work for us going forward.
Well, that sounds easy. And I have to imagine, since you deal a lot with change, like all of this sort of broad scale work culture stuff is showing up, if not directly, like how do I deal with creating a more flexible workplace, or how do I deal with the younger generations, maybe having a different perspective on work that's honestly perhaps a good thing to start to absorb, but we don't know how. And then some of it maybe is even just underneath whatever the surface level problems are. How do you help people navigate this with the work you do? This seems huge.
It is huge. And I think it begins with defining what we're talking about when we, and what we're trying to address when we talk about, specifically about culture.
Yeah.
That was, you asked me earlier about my background. I really didn't get into it, but I come from the agency world. You do?
Yeah.
And my last role was as Chief Culture Officer at BCW, a PR agency that has since rebranded and merged again. But I was brought in when the BCW merger happened to help bring two very different cultures together. So that's really the level at which I work with my clients, is at the level of culture. And as you say, kind of getting below the surface of those surface level issues, the problems of the day. There are patterns that are underlying those issues. There are structures that sustain those patterns. And there are paradigms, or basically belief systems or assumptions, that were involved in designing those structures, and it all bubbles up. So that's why we really don't get to any kind of meaningful or sustainable change in an organization or any complex system unless we are attending to the culture and helping the culture shift, helping those deep-seated paradigms and assumptions give way to more productive, more creative mindsets. That's how we get to a place of a healthier culture. So I start by defining culture for folks. It's one of those very squishy words.
Yeah.
I define it as the complex ecosystem that powers your performance.
Okay.
So instead of it being the words on the wall or pints down at the pub after work, those extracurriculars, the window dressing, it's really about how the work gets done and how we're connected to, relating to, acting, reacting, and interacting together. I mean, that is the culture. And we can actually work on that with intention. So we start with trying to understand the culture, the system as it is today.
Yeah.
Including the tough stuff, including the ways that the culture is stuck in some kind of cycle that's keeping it mired in a status quo or keeping it reactive instead of creative. I often will use that kind of distinction. Fear-based, right? So what are we afraid of and why are we protecting ourselves with these old ways of working that aren't really serving the mission we're on today? And so we do a little excavating of those old beliefs. And then we do some aligning around new core principles, new beliefs that are going to take us in the direction of the vision. And then we start experimenting. And that's my process. It's my path of ease, I call it. Excavate, align, start experimenting.
I love that process. I have to imagine before you get to excavate, there's some work to be done to break down and help people reduce some of those fears, because the fears that underlie everything are often at the surface. And, I know when I've worked with some clients, like sometimes the belief is our culture is fine. There's just these problems that keep showing up and they're resistant to draw connection to the culture, often because the culture is personal. I may have created that culture, or at the very least, I've spent the last X amount of years nurturing and allowing that culture to do whatever it does. And therefore it says something about me if I'm going to go in and excavate it and turn it into something else. How can you help people move through all of those complex emotions to get to an openness to this process?
That is a conversation that I have early on with my clients when they call me, and they generally don't hire me until they have made peace with the fact that they're going to be doing some real work here, that we're not just going to be addressing those issues of the day. Oh, that we've got turnover in this part of the business. Once they are aware of the fact that all of the pressing moments of the day are parts of patterns, that's an easy enough conversation to have. Is this the only time this has happened? Are you dealing with an isolated incident right now? Or are there other things in your system that you need to be aware of? And once we can start having an honest conversation about that, their eyes do start to open a little bit to what the work is that really needs to be done. But you're right, there's still that level of anxiety around, what does this say about me as a leader? Or I might have to change myself in order for this to happen. I might have to actually do something differently. So this is an opportunity to do even more definition, right? So if your culture is an ecosystem, I think of it as like a coral reef, right? So your culture is a coral reef, right? And every member of the coral reef, every member of your culture is contributing in how they act, react, and interact every day, right? Everybody's feeding into this. But you as the leader, you set the temperature of the water in the coral reef, right? Is the water hot? Is it cold? Is there a good, healthy balance of psychological safety and a meaningful challenge for people to sink into? That's where we get our flow in the ecosystem from. And the leader determines that. The leader really does. And not only in terms of the vision they put forward and the structural operations of the business, but the little things that they do, how they receive feedback, how they offer feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just making those micro shifts in terms of, leaning a little bit further in the direction of, if they happen to be, let's go with the perfectionism you were talking about earlier, if they happen to be a perfectionistic leader,
Mm-hmm.
moving a little bit in the direction of coaching
Mm.
instead of having control and the
Yeah.
micromanagement that comes along with that. Just if you can ease a little bit in the direction of coaching other people and developing their capabilities, that can have a massive cultural impact.
Mm.
So understanding the power of leadership, that I always say the curse of leadership is that nothing changes until you do.
Yeah.
The gift of leadership is that once you do, everything can change.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be those small little shifts.
Mm. I, I love that you're actually answering some of the questions that I was thinking about, because you defined culture, and part of me wanted a parallel definition of leadership, and I think you kind of just did it there in a really interesting way, in terms of um, a leader is ultimately the person who needs to step into change first to then allow any other kind of meaningful change. So I thought that was really interesting. I also love you've mentioned that you kind of look at things from different sides, and you've created these interesting polarities. I mean, earlier you mentioned kind of the reactive thing versus the creative, and I think like that kind of language can really help people to just go like, those are the two ends that we can live on. And of course, most people are going to go, I want to be more towards the creative. Now let's talk about how to get there. And then, you talked a little bit there also about the psychological safety, and then also having some kind of meaningful challenge. And I think that's a really hard space. I think we sometimes swing on a pendulum on that one a little bit. In recent years, I think there's been some good talk about the psychological safety part. But some people's instincts around that might be, therefore, I must remove all challenge.
Right.
So how do you help people navigate between some of these polarities that are out there, so that they can create the kind of temperature that allows people to ultimately thrive?
And therein, TJ, is the whole crux of this work.
Yeah.
Right? Is helping take us from that linear thinking of, okay, we want to get from A to B.
Mm-hmm.
We want to achieve this kind of tangible transactional outcome, into an understanding that we live in a very complex world.
Mm-hmm.
And you all watching this at home are leading massively complex organizations. Even if you lead a team of 5, guess
Right.
what? That's a complex system,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there are no absolutes here, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not in either or territory. It's so our work as leaders, if we really want to be effective leaders in this world today, we want to be transformational with our impact, not just transactional. The
Mm-hmm.
invitation is to recognize that we are always in the flow of these polarities.
Mm-hmm.
And there are countless polarities. There are countless. So whatever you're up against, internal to external focus, control or freedom, right? And autonomy.
Yeah.
And neither one is correct.
Yeah.
But the way that you lead and design and develop and sustain your culture is about how you dance with these polarities, with these seeming contradictions that are actually totally interdependent on one another, right? We need both of them. We can't really be psychologically safe if we don't have a meaningful challenge, right? Because then we're just languishing. Then we're getting stuck in a comfort zone.
Yeah.
And it's a slow decline, right? It's called, in systems thinking terms, it's called the drift to low performance, where it's just like you keep lowering and lowering and lowering your expectations.
Yeah.
And performance goes off the cliff, and then nobody's safe.
Right.
Right. Likewise, we can't only have a meaningful challenge without psychological safety, because you'll challenge people and you will get a brief uptick in performance for sure. Right. Short term, giving people a challenge and pushing them hard can get you results. And then comes the crash. Yeah. And then you have to do it again, and it peaks, but lower. And you've got diminishing returns in this roller coaster over time. And, ultimately you're not able to achieve much that's meaningful at all. So both of these need each other, but you're right. We think in terms of either or, and we have to choose. But the way to a healthy, high performing culture is to continually be looking at both and finding ways to bring both forward in the organization.
I love that the language you use there of there's a dance there. And then the idea that they are interdependent. They can't really exist without each other. I mean, it feels like it goes back to like ancient wisdom that's always kind of been there. But we are so good at forgetting some of the ancient wisdom. And we think we have new answers to things that are just human truths.
Just human truths. Yeah. These are human organizations after all, right? Like we're still dealing with these realities.
I know, despite what I think some people ultimately maybe like subconsciously, I think people kind of want to strip that away and just make it like a thing that I can just sort of plug and play and do things rather than recognizing and actually embracing all of the complexities of human beings and how we show up. You know?
Yeah. I mean, can I tell you a secret?
Sure.
I would love to do that too. I think that would be great. Yeah. In fact, I spent many years in my career, which has all been about change, organizational change, societal change, community change. I tried all of that. I tried making it as, very simple, clear, tangible, direct lines. Here's what you do, command and control.
Yeah.
Giving everybody the burning platform and telling them they got to jump and guess what? It just doesn't work. Yeah. It just doesn't work. Not for the level of change that we're trying to bring forward and not for the level of ambition that our organizations have today. We really have to just reckon with the problem of our humanity and the massive potential of our humanity. Right?
Do you think our organizations are set up for that currently?
Well, to go back to this exciting moment that we're in, I think no.
Yeah.
Not currently. But I hear from a lot of organizations who are reaching a new level of awareness. They might not know exactly what they need, but they are, I think, more aware than ever that what they have been doing is not working. And that in order to ensure their not just success, but their own survival in the next 5 years, they have to do things differently. And I get some calls. I got a call this week from someone who reached out proactively and said, okay, I'm looking ahead and I know we're going to need to do things differently in the next phase. Can we work with you to get organized there? I get more calls from organizations who are like, wow, okay, so we have tried to merge, or we have tried to take the next step in innovation, or we're trying to change our brand. And we now realize we have to bring our culture with us because the linear plans are falling apart, right? And there's a lot of pain involved in that. Yeah. But I do think whether it's proactive or reactive, I think there is greater awareness. I think there's greater knowledge around what some of these kind of principles and realities are.
Yeah.
And I think leaders are hungry for, how do I lead in a world that's this complex? And how do I think about my organization as, something that isn't just happening, but something that I can truly play a role in shaping?
How do you, you made this distinction between kind of transactional and sort of transformational. And I think there are a lot of folks who, if asked, would say transformational sounds good. Not all, but a fair amount. But when you're mired in the transactional, and I certainly think my experience in the agency world was often heavily transactional, despite a fair amount of sort of conversation around wanting to kind of change the world, do big things, do great things. The day-to-day felt very transactional. How do you help people, and I assume that's obviously starting at the leadership level, move from that and extract themselves from that transactional place, which is very sticky, and move into that transformational place?
There are levels, and I agree with you in the agency world. I think the agency world from where I sit and the way I look at business, faces, two major problems that are interrelated. One of them is that the model is not sustainable. So agencies make their money by getting the most possible value out of people at the lowest possible cost. And the billing of time is just something that is never going to be profitable in a sustainable way. And I think that's a real issue for agencies. And the transactional mindset that then begets is ultimately why agencies are not able to be as creative. This is in my humble opinion, not able to be as creative as they want to be because they're operating like factories, and they don't make widgets. So there is an opportunity here to look at the model, to look at those structures and to challenge, is this really what makes sense for the kind of impact that we want to have? And, I'm working with smaller independent agencies that are getting to kind of write their own rules and determine what their cultures look like and the kind of ecosystems that they want to build. And I work with agencies that are in holding companies where they really are beholden to a particular kind of, manage to the quarter mindset. But, I remember talking to one leader in one of those companies who said, I've been wanting to bring this change forward and I just don't understand why the vision is so clear. The plan has been so clear. Why haven't we been able to make progress? And I said, well, let's look at the decision making. How are you making decisions? Are you making a decision on a 5-year time horizon? Or are you making it on a quarterly time horizon? And that is going to be where the rubber meets the road. So some of it is a mindset shift. Some of it's going to have to be an operational shift.
Do you have any hope that on the holding company level, where there is that shareholder quarterly, sometimes even quicker than quarterly kind of mindset, like, and it is operationalized, how is there a way through that to something better there? Or is it going to take the smaller independent places demonstrating a way forward before the bigger places can go, oh, maybe we could do that too?
Again, I'm going to have to answer with both. I think holding companies, I feel like holding companies are kind of suffering right now. I think holding companies are always suffering. I think holding companies are always, but they're kind of, because of that transactional mindset, they're like, oh, the problem is at the agency level, the problem is at whatever. Maybe at one point, holding companies will come to a level of suffering, a moment of pain that's significant enough to say, well, maybe we should do things differently. Maybe we should give a little bit more autonomy. I'm thinking of one holding company in particular, which I will not name, that is really good about letting their companies be themselves. They're not trying to smash them together. They're really letting them exist and create those ecosystems that are right for them. And they see the role of the holding company being to create the conditions, to create the culture that allow those sub ecosystems to thrive. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. The top of a hierarchy in any natural system exists to coordinate, not to control, but to coordinate and to enable. And that I think if the larger, perhaps more entrenched holding companies of the world are interested in that path, I think they'll find that they actually have quite a lot to gain. Yeah,
that's interesting. I wonder if some emerging holding companies are going to push, if they can demonstrate success in some of the ways you're talking about, and then others maybe emerge with that mindset of being more of a coordinating force rather than a controlling force, that it demonstrates that it can actually happen. And then maybe the bigger ones either just say, well, I don't want to play that game. Okay. Or let me try to play that game and figure out how to play it. But I wonder a little bit about when you're in that system, okay, let's say I work for an agency, it's a holding company model, it's pretty transactional, it's pretty quarterly incentivized. And I have some of this vision. And even at the agency level, I have this vision of cultural change and wanting to do things differently. Is there a way to make any kind of meaningful change in that environment? If so, what does it look like?
So that's the great news,
Hmm.
is that in a complex system, you can make change starting where you are.
Hmm.
And it really doesn't have to be changing the world in a day, right?
Yeah.
We start small, we start where we are, we start with a team. We start with an initiative, we start with a particular client team, right? How do we want to create a culture in this space?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Let's take the area that we have some influence over, right? What is our sphere of influence? And let's look at that as an ecosystem and just start there.
Mm-hmm.
The beautiful thing about this is that even in making small shifts in terms of, okay, this is how we give feedback on this team, or this is how we navigate conflict here, what you're doing is you are actually changing the way that this part of the system operates. And
Mm-hmm.
because there is no dividing line really between
Mm-hmm.
this and that part of the system, these things tend to spread. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the one team starts performing more and more, people start to get interested in, oh, what's going on over there? Let's look at that.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe that leader gets promoted because they're having greater success. They're having greater employee retention, for example, client satisfaction because the work quality is better, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways that then, through no effort of your own, has ripple effects across the system.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of change leaders, and again, I have been this change leader, I want to own it. I think a lot of us kind of, spend a lot of our energy like shaking our fists up the ladder,
Yeah.
like, oh, if only they got it up there, then things could change.
Yeah.
Y'all, that is not how change works. Change
Mm.
rarely comes from the corner office. Occasionally you will get a very enlightened CEO who
Mm-hmm.
understands systems thinking, who understands what culture impact has on performance. But
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, the executive's role is to keep the ship steady, to protect jobs,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of move things forward in a reasonable pace. They're not necessarily going to be the people who are shaking up the business models and deciding
Mm.
we need to radically do things differently, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. We don't need them to be that. And we need to stop waiting for them to be that. We need to
Mm.
take some responsibility for the ecosystem that we have some
Mm-hmm.
influence over, and we
Yeah.
need to start the work there.
Mm. That's a really interesting distinction because I think it's true. A lot of us are shaking our fists um, and and we can often feel powerless in that situation. And how do you help people recognize the power they actually have so that they're willing to maybe try some experiments in their own ecosystem, whether it's that team of 5, like you said, or maybe I've got a slightly bigger team, some little, corner of this company that I can do something with. What helps people recognize that they actually do have some power to make change, even without the upstairs folks playing along?
This is really a mindset shift in
Yeah.
my view. It's one of the 3 main mindsets that I teach and train teams on. One of them
Mm-hmm.
is growth mindset, right? Continuous learning and stretching into new challenges. One of them is that both and thinking that we've been talking about with the polarities.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
the third one is a leadership mindset. And I break it down really simply and say, okay, in this moment, in whatever incident of change that you are facing,
Mm.
or whatever, thing that has just occurred, are you in a to me mindset or are you in a through me mindset?
Mm.
Is this happening to you? And just to be clear, sometimes things happen to us, right?
Yeah.
Things happen to us in life, in work, but is the story that you are telling yourself about this is happening to me, I
Mm.
am the victim, or I need to be a hero, I
Yeah.
need to show up and save the day. Both of those are in the to me camp, by the way, because
Mm.
they're both reactive. They're both,
Right.
they're both reacting to what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Or am I looking at this situation and saying, okay, what here is possible through me?
Mm.
what is possible through me? And there's always an answer to that question, even if it's, I'm going to show up differently to the next meeting myself,
Right.
or I'm going to ask the team what they think. Instead of telling everybody what to do. Yeah. There is some way that you can do something about whatever is going on here. And that way of showing up and that decision that you make is going to be what makes the difference for people. To get a little more granular there, because that's kind of a high level, but it's a useful question to ask ourselves: to me or through me?
Yeah, I like it.
Check yourself in the moment. To dig a little bit further into what that looks like, because you used the word power, which I think is really important. We have a very complicated relationship to power.
Yeah.
The power paradox classically, right, is that like the people who should have power don't want it. Yeah. And the people who have power can't wield it responsibly. And the minute you get power, you become corrupted by it. Yep. Right. So it's very, very messy. It's very complicated. Yeah. When we shift into through me mindset, when we shift into truly transformational leadership, I am going to bring something forward through how I show up in this moment. We are doing two things with power, not one or the other, but both. Stepping into our power, because we always have power.
Yeah.
I think it was Martin Luther King who defined power as the ability to drive purpose. So it's really just the ability to affect change at some level. So we have to step into our power. We kind of have to do that first, I think. And then we share power. And if we do both of those things, we are in through me mode, and we'll be able to have transformational impact on some level. Will we be able to overhaul the system overnight? No, even a CEO can't do that.
Yeah.
But we can start where we are and do what we have and use what we can, to quote Arthur Ashe.
There's so much richness in that simple mindset shift, or even just the question of to me versus through me, because I think you mentioned this idea of adopting more of a leader mindset. And what I heard there is I can adopt that no matter where I am. I don't have to have any kind of title. I don't have to have any like corporately defined power. It's more like you said, I can step into the power that I have in that moment and make choices about how I'm going to act and show up that will influence and people will respond to differently. I mean, I think about the simplicity of how you maybe show up in a meeting, and you mentioned that. And sometimes, certainly in the agency world, we can be pretty cynical and sarcastic at times. And sometimes there's definitely a place for that. I live in that for sure. But bringing a dash of optimism in the face of a meeting that maybe didn't go great has so much power in a room, because a room can go one way or the other really quickly, depending on how maybe one person, when they speak up. So if you go like, well, this is an interesting challenge, I wonder if we could do it this way, versus saying like, oh my God, there they go again, ruining our day. That's a pretty powerful action that a junior person within an agency can actually do. And then when you get up to the level of CEO, what I think is interesting there, certainly in the agency space right now, there's so much fear of the changes that are happening, AI and all this other stuff, and the rapid pace of change, and the sense that I can't grab onto it and do anything with it. It's like, well, you don't have to necessarily grab onto the thing and do anything with it. Just yourself make decisions and choices about how you're showing up. That can have an impact in the midst of the grand scale change. I think that feels like a powerful tool for each one of us. And I feel excited to even just explore it personally, but I wonder, does the light bulb of that go off for some folks as you turn? Because that's what it felt like a little bit to me. Like, wow, this is just something I can carry with me forever.
It really does. It's so simple. And maybe that's why it sticks with folks.
Yeah.
It especially works well when I'm coaching a leader, say one-on-one. We typically start those engagements with a leadership assessment. So
Mm-hmm.
they're able to see, and this isn't a performance review.
Yeah.
It's a tool that allows us to see, how your leadership is perceived by you and received by the people around you in all
Mm-hmm.
directions.
Yeah.
And when leaders are able to see with some level of rigor and objectivity, I mean, all 360s are subjective, but to be
Mm-hmm.
able to see with some science around it, oh, this is how I'm getting stuck into me.
Mm-hmm.
And here's where I'm excellent at stretching up into through me. Maybe I'm great at sharing power, but I
Mm-hmm.
haven't really been good at stepping into power, or vice versa. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm really good at saying, this is where we're going, come with me, but I'm not so good at empowering other people to
Mm-hmm.
use their voices and to bring their ideas to the table.
Yeah.
With that data times the simplicity of this to me to through me, reactive to creative shift that we're making,
Mm-hmm.
leaders, not only did they kind of get it, they kind of get addicted to it because they
Mm.
realize that the changes that they need to make are not changing their whole personality, right? There are these
Mm-hmm.
little shifts in, oh,
Yeah.
I can just do this differently. And oh, by the way, leading in that way is so much easier.
Yeah.
So much easier.
Yes.
Right? To lead in a way that is like, okay, I'm going to step into my power, and I'm also going to allow the people around me to be powerful
Mm-hmm.
and trust them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
respect their voices and make room for them. That's why I call it a path of ease, because
Yeah.
ultimately our work leading change or leading organizations or leading amid complexity, all of it, our work becomes so much easier when we shift out of that transactional either or linear way of seeing the world, which is
Mm-hmm.
hard because it's impossible, and into this new way of being
Yeah.
with the way things really are.
Yeah. I think there's that linear way feels maybe easier, mentally it's just easier to wrap our brains around, but then the experience is like banging your head against a wall. Like you're just constantly frustrated and why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? And I think to your point, I think the to me through me question is so it's simple, but it's not like saying there's then one way forward. It's just simple in allowing you to shift your mindset. And then you still get to like move in through the complexity and experience the complexity coming through you and using all of your creative tools and everyone else's creative tools to move through it. So it's not a simple execution, but it's a simple mindset shift. And I think that is probably a relief to a lot of people.
Absolutely. It's a simple mindset shift. And the gift of that shift, I think, is that it happens in the moment,
Yeah.
in the flow of work, which is the only time that we have available to us to lead anyway, right? Is just right now. So if I can just, boom, broaden my perspective right now, see possibility where a moment ago were only problems, take some responsibility where a moment ago I was feeling totally disempowered and hopeless, then in that moment, I can make a new choice and do something differently.
Yeah, I think it feels very empowering, and it feels like it is the simplest way I've heard to shift ourselves out of the victim mindset. And we may not even realize we're in the victim mindset, but we often live it because again, you're shaking your fist at the world, at the person who's whatever. Like we all do it, and I think if you ask people, you need to shift from a victim mindset, their first reaction is, yeah, but I am a victim because look at this, and this. And it's like, if you just can help people shift the way they perceive this and how they are able to move through it. Oh, okay. So I don't have to deny reality. I just have to rethink what my reality looks like in the face of it. And that's like a much easier thing to do, I think.
And what am I willing to own?
Yeah.
Right. I think, if I could offer our listeners one tip, try not to tell anybody they're into me, right? Because that's only going to send them deeper into to me, because now you've become part of their problem. So as we share this with other people, it's really a self-awareness check, right? It's
Yeah.
like, okay, what's going on in my mind right now? And we
Yeah.
have this terminology, and maybe as a team, we can be like, wow, we as a team right now in this meeting are very much into me territory.
Yeah.
And how anybody have a question? This is a great way to shift, right? Anybody have a question that can help us get into through me? Where's that door? Can somebody find it? And but yeah, use it for yourself rather than going around being like, you're into me and you're into, and weaponizing it. Yeah, it's not going to work. It's going to backfire.
I can imagine. And I think that's a challenge with any coaching tool, device, assessment, whatever, is helping people understand how to kind of manage their thinking around it and not turn it into this blunt instrument that we just beat people up with. Reflecting it back to ourselves as much as possible is probably good advice with any of those things, I would think. Yeah.
Yet another way that it's a through me practice, right?
Yeah.
It's just like this thing is like a Russian nesting doll, layers and layers and layers of the same idea.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to shift to a question from, there's actually two questions. So our previous guest, I always like to ask guests to ask a question for the next guest. And our last guest actually had two questions if you're open to it. So
sure.
The first one, our last guest was Julie Junglewala, and she works actually in some similar spaces, just different types of clients, more in the educational space, but does a lot of organizational, cultural, transformational stuff. But I think she wanted to initially create a question that's a little more just to you, which is, what's the biggest change that you've gone through personally, and how did you navigate that, maybe using some of the stuff you've been learning on from a work perspective?
Yeah. This is such a good question. Thank you. Julie, was it Julie?
Julie, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Really appreciate it. Well, I like to say everything that I have learned, I've learned the hard way. And certainly there have been moments in my life that have really brought these insights, these practices into sharp relief for me.
Yeah.
And I the one that comes to mind, and that some people will know about, those who know me and have worked with me in the past, 5 years or so, is I was about 7 months into that chief culture officer role at BCW when I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And it was an aggressive type. So I had to move swiftly into chemo and was in treatment for 5 months. And it was my function in that role, in that job, was by that point we had kind of landed on, we're going to be emphasizing growth mindset. We're going to be emphasizing this idea of mindset as a cultural pillar that we're all aligned around.
Okay.
And I decided, I wanted to work through my treatment because I get a lot of energy and satisfaction from my work, as we talked about at the very beginning.
Yeah.
It's a big part of who I am. And I just decided, you know what? I'm going to make this a through me moment. And I'm going to take this as an opportunity to focus on the things that I can control and show up and bring forward who I am and the intentions that I have to be of service in the greatest possible way. And I'm going to also let people know what I'm going through, because I'm in a position of some power here, at least some visibility. And if I can make it safe for, one other person to feel like in this company, you can be going through something really hard and be safe talking about it, then it would be worth it. And that's not a choice for everybody. Certainly people who prefer to be more private about their health challenges, I have complete respect for, and that's the right choice for them. For me, it was, okay, I'm going to lean into this situation in my life with everything that I'm professing and coaching and teaching the people around me, and see what I can learn from it myself, and B, make it safe for others.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that that's obviously deeply personal, so I appreciate you sharing it. And I think the idea of bringing that kind of through me mindset into something so deeply personal. I think at the very least, it just demonstrates the power of that mindset shift in that it can guide us through almost anything potentially. And that is powerful. And again, somebody else might use that idea of through me and come up with completely different ways of bringing, like you said, I may keep it private and here's why. Great. But there is, again, I think what I hear is there was something, it felt like it was maybe very empowering to you to be able to step into that because of the mindset that you were able to adopt.
Absolutely. Cancer is something that happens to you.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
And the way I decided to live that period of my life
Mm-hmm.
was very much in a through me way. And I think that it made all the difference for me in terms of my ability to be okay amid that massive challenge.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm going to move on to her next question since she did have two. And this one, a little more broad focus. And I think you touched on a little bit of the COVID stuff and how that impacted us. What she was asking if you noticed any shifts pre and post COVID in terms of organizational transformation. It sounds like you did. Is there anything particular we can bring up here that you've noticed in that space?
I'll just speak for myself here. Yeah. And I wonder if your listeners will have had this experience too, but I do find if I look back pre-COVID, mm-hmm. even though we still have a long way to go, I find a tremendous degree of empathy in our organizations that did not exist 5 years ago, or at least wasn't really accessible beyond your immediate circles.
Yeah.
I think we've humanized, again, not fully and not perfectly, that will never happen, right? This is where it's a journey. But I think that I think that the road to get to the conversations that really matter is a lot shorter than it used to be. I used to have to work a lot harder to help leaders understand the importance of culture. Yeah. And I think they understand the impact of that ecosystem powering their organization. I think they know that they're working with human beings and not just numbers on a spreadsheet. I think that the work of Amy Edmondson around psychological safety and we're seeing, like, if you look back at old Harvard Business Review magazines, that tone has shifted, right? Yeah. So I do think that quite a lot has changed and is emergent right now that is supporting our ability to change. We just have to be up for it, up for the real work.
Yeah, I think that's what it feels like to me. Like the conversation has clearly shifted. And I think to your point, that then allows us to have those discussions with leaders they get it a little more quickly. But the kind of the analogy I have is, something that moves from your head and then it sort of moves into your body. And now you're fully living and embodying it. I think organizationally, that's where we're at. How are we getting it into the bodies of these organizations so that they're actualizing it instead of simply having the conversation and maybe trying? I want to be fair. I think a lot of folks are trying, but they don't know how. Those muscles are not fully developed yet. So it is going to take a lot of experimenting and not everyone's answer has to look the same too, I think. And that's what's really interesting right now. I think we're in the phase of a lot of people trying experiments, and some people are falling on their face rather publicly with it. And we'll shake a fist at that. And to some degree, like, okay, it's fair to say, like, what we noticed that we're not necessarily thinking is moving us forward, but also having a little bit of empathy and patience with people as they stumble and fall, and then giving them the space and the permission to go, okay, now what? What's my next experiment? Rather than, I think if we do villainize everyone who doesn't embody this the way we want, we're going to retreat. We're not going to continue to step forward into it. So I imagine you maybe are noticing some of that. And is that part of your work, helping people when they maybe do stumble a bit in this work, that they can embrace that part of the process and keep moving forward?
It's a huge part of my work.
Yeah.
Not only building trust and relationships among teams who are doing this together and learning how to navigate, like we were talking about earlier, the feedback conversations, the conflict moments, but also just within ourselves, allowing ourselves some grace, allowing ourselves, to be human and fallible and to have foibles. I teach a course called Momentum. It's a 12-week leadership course that's all about teaching leaders this transformational leadership thing through mindfulness meditation is the practice that is kind of the undercurrent throughout the program. Because again, we're training ourselves to get out of those automatic reactive cycles and come into the moment to make new choices. And what you were saying earlier about kind of getting out of the head and into the body is a really essential element of what we're doing in that program. And the other kind of piece that's a part of it is the kindness that we have to allow ourselves because we're doing hard things.
Yeah.
Right? Like sitting down, like leading an organization is a very hard thing. Sitting down to meditate and looking at your mind for 5 minutes is a very hard thing to do. And so alongside these practices of leadership and mindfulness and mindset shifts, we also have to be practicing self-compassion. We also have to be giving ourselves grace and space. We also have to be celebrating the progress we've made. Those of us particularly who are like visionary leaders with a lot of ambition and we want to do big things, we're going to be constantly holding ourselves up against, what we haven't achieved. But being able to look back and say, oh my gosh, these past 12 weeks, so much has shifted within me. And celebrating that and knowing that because this is a practice and we just keep going with our leadership, even if you stop meditating after the program, you're still a leader. And that too is a practice. You'll continue to see this beautiful thing unfolding into greater and greater ease.
Oh, I like the sound of that. I will say. I want to give you a chance to ask our next guest a question. And this is Michelle Edelman, who she's the CEO of an ad agency down in New Orleans called Peter Meyer. And they've had a recent kind of shift in their brand and their approach. Really exciting stuff they're doing. Do you have a question for Michelle?
I'm always interested when I encounter a business that is doing a rebrand or working with rebranding. What is changing in the culture or what's evolving in the culture to deliver on that brand promise? Right? So what's going on in the system? Because any rebrand is looking to change something in the organization, or at least change the perception. And so that's where I get curious about what's going to happen in the system.
I like that question. I think that's just like a wonderful question for any organization, that there is that tension sometimes between the brand and what we're trying to put out in the world and what the reality of the organization is. And what's funny is when you bring those two things together and they are, coming out of the same soup, so to speak, like, it's so much better. Like, and it seems so obvious at times, like when you're working with a company and it's like, you want them to embody the things that you're saying. And there's resistance in there at times. I don't get the sense that that's going to be true for Michelle. It feels like a full immersion from what I've understood, but I'd love to see how she responds and how it maybe presents a model for others to step into that kind of change.
Yeah, I'm excited to listen in. Thank you for the opportunity to ask it.
I will keep you posted. So now we get into the last couple of questions I always like to ask folks. And we've probably touched on some of this next one a bit, but maybe we can just synthesize it here. If you could wave a magic wand and create a fully desuckified work world, what would that look like to you?
Okay. A desuckified work world would be a world in which everyone gets to work with dignity and with a sense of purpose, where they know what their work is for, and where our work can contribute to a richness that is not just a richness for some people at the expense of others, and a richness that is not just about assets, but a richness that is about really just how we are making our lives better, how we're making our lives better through the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
And I guess just to come back to the transactional to transformational, a desuckified work world would be one in which we finally realize that numerical growth on the chart has limits, natural limits, reasonable limits, but human potential is boundless.
Wow. Yeah, I love that perspective. And I think there's so many of us who want that. And I think your idea of the to me, through me can help people begin to step into that no matter where they are. And that, I think, is an exciting possibility to realize that it's not simply something that only if we have the magic wand of power, like at a high level in an organization, that we can do. We all have the ability to make some choices that can start to create the momentum towards that. So I love how your vision, I think, again, not a perfect version of that vision, but a journey towards that vision feels very possible because of some of the stuff you brought into this conversation. So that gets me excited to know, like, we can all start to step into it.
Beautiful.
So
I'm excited too.
I like to bring a little levity to the end of the show. So one of the things I do in this show, if you've ever listened, there are sound effects that will show up in the intro and outro in particular. I'm a cat guy, so you hear some meows and other stuff, but we invite all sounds equally into this space. So do you have a desuckified sound effect that you can add to our program here?
I do listen. And so I knew this was coming. And I don't know how creative it is, but I was thinking about this notion of, starting small where we are and things rippling out. So here's my sound. Echo, echo, echo.
I love that. I love that because not only of what it evokes, but you did it very well. Like, you managed to make me believe the echo. So that was really cool. That will be in our show somewhere. Maybe it shows up a couple times. We'll see. So thank you for that. I appreciate
that.
Last thing I always ask is how do people connect to you? Where do they find you online? How do they learn more about the work you're doing and maybe learn about how they can bring it into their world?
Oh, wonderful. So you can find me at KristinLisanti.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Instagram, Threads, not on Facebook or Twitter. Don't come find me there, but otherwise come find me in any of those places. Let's connect. Let's keep this conversation going. Let me know what spoke to you. I also have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for on my website. And I host a community of practice for transformational leaders at radiantleader.co. So if you're interested in taking this practice into your life and work in a deeper way, we would love to have you come check us out there.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Very cool. Well, I invite people to check out all the things, and I will, of course, add all of that stuff to the show notes and the intro and all that stuff so people can find you. Well, Kristen, this was a wonderful conversation. I feel like we dug into a lot of good stuff, and I know for me, I'm feeling like I learned some new things that I'm inspired to bring into my own world. So thank you for that.
TJ, this was so much fun. Thank you for having me. You've got my wheels turning too. So
awesome.
Glad to have been here with you.
Very cool. Well, we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And a huge thanks to Kristen for bringing an open heart and a delightfully fresh perspective to the show. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, rate, review, subscribe, or consider dating a famous musician and convincing them to write a song called "Desuckify Work, You Big Frickin' Jerk" that shoots up the charts to #1 and lands this show on the Hot 1000 list of podcasts to consider while making your cat breakfast. You can follow Kristen on LinkedIn as well as Instagram, and check out her site at KristenLisanti.com, where you can explore her radiant change methodology and the power of transformational leadership. If you like the idea of transformation, you should also explore my site and my Substack newsletter. I'm on a mission to make work suck less, and I'd love for you to join me. Want to make that desuckification happen ASAP? Let's set up a free half-hour coaching session. Bye, everyone.